Thank you very much. So sometime in the next 12 hours, we expect that redacted affidavit to go public. For a preview of what we could learn and what we likely won't learn, let's bring in former federal prosecutors Francie Hakes and Joe Moreno. Thank you both for being with us. I want to start with this from Judge Reinhart, Magistrate Judge Reinhart's order today. He said, I find that the government has met its burden of showing a compelling reason or good cause to seal portions of the affidavit because disclosure would reveal, one, the identity of witnesses, law enforcement agents, and uncharged parties, two, the investigation strategy, direction, scope, sources, and methods, and three, grand jury information protected by Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E. He says the government has met its burden, essentially, of showing that it's done this in as narrowly tailored possible a way. But, Francie, does that mean we'll get anything when this thing is released? What do you think we'll see?
Yeah, very little, Shannon. I think what that means is the real meat of this case, the real meat of what was the probable cause. That is, what is the crime? What is the allegation of the elements of the crimes that are alleged in the warrant? What is contained inside the affidavit? I don't think we're going to see that probable cause because it's very broad what the Justice Department said. It's very broad to say we have to protect witnesses and agents and sources and methods. And almost all of that is going to be part of that probable cause. So I don't think we're going to know a lot tomorrow.
So Professor Jonathan Turley has been talking about this, that this is an opportunity for the Attorney General, for Garland, to release more information to, in a way, win back the trust of a lot of Americans out there. He writes this. He says, Garland's leaky ship, the justice continues an all too familiar pattern of demanding secrecy while leaking information. He says the feds have maintained that absolute secrecy is essential to protect their investigation and national security while reportedly leaking some of the very information the affidavit contains. He goes on to say later, with modest disclosures, Garland can earn the trust of the public rather than simply demand it. So, Joe, do you think any of that will sway the Attorney General to give us a little bit more than a bunch of black lines on paper?
You know, I hope that's not the case, Shannon, but I mean, I really do. But I agree with Professor Turley. I mean, I think what frustrates so many people is the feeling that we've been here before with respect to Donald Trump and the Justice Department. You have this spectacular raid that gained all this public attention. You have a Justice Department that officially won't tell us virtually anything about the case, but then appears to be leaking like a sieve to the Washington Post and to the New York Times. And now they have the opportunity through this affidavit to tell us more, and they're trying like anything to say, sorry, no, we can't show more because we might prosecute someone as a result of this. And again, you know, call me crazy, but I don't see a prosecution of a former president coming quibbling over declassification authority and the custody of presidential records. I don't see it. I think they wanted their records back, and they like dangling the possibility of a prosecution out there, and that's not transparent. And no matter how many times the White House over there is saying, this isn't political, it's not a political prosecution, a lot of people are taking a look at this, looking at the history and saying, this feels really political.
Well, Michael Conway's former counsel for the U.S. The House Judiciary Committee, he wrote a piece over at NBC News, an op-ed, which I think is interesting. His argument is that they shouldn't be releasing parts of the affidavit. He says the very existence of redactions can create misunderstanding. The parties seeking the release of the entire affidavit will have no role in deciding what's redacted. Neither they nor the public will know whether the redactions alter the gist of the affidavit. An affidavit with most of its text blacked out is more likely to engender public distrust and promote conspiracy theories than if the entire document had remained sealed. Your reaction to that, Francie?
Well, I mean, I sort of agree with that. I mean, I do think that when you release a document that's mostly blacked out, it's just going to make people angry. And I think it should make people angry. I think Joe is right. It's unlikely, or it should be unlikely, that Donald Trump get prosecuted for anything. And yet they're treating this as though it is this massive espionage case where you're really worried the North Koreans are going to know exactly what the FBI is doing as they're searching through Mar-a-Lago. It's kind of ridiculous if you think about it. And so I do think he has a point. I think that the whole affidavit should be released. Sure, black out agents' names if that's what you're worried about. But the whole affidavit should be released so we, the American people, can decide whether or not this very troubled agency, the FBI, and its sort of mothership, the DOJ, is acting politically here as they did during Donald Trump's entire term. And the leaking, the constant leaking, certainly doesn't help their case. and it doesn't help them argue that they're not being political.
Well, and listen, this could cut two ways. Critics of the president say he's got to be careful what he asks for, because there may be things in this affidavit that are very potentially detrimental to him. Joe, I asked Laura Trump about that, and she says, we're not worried at all. We want it to be an open book. We want to see all of it. But they don't know what they don't know, what the government has put together. Should they be worried at all?
Well, Donald Trump should be careful. I mean, he probably hasn't helped himself in the past week because in his efforts to kind of lay out his story, he's undercut himself a little bit. And now it sounds a little more like he wasn't as perhaps accommodating to the FBI as it seemed, and it kind of bulked up the DOJ's case that they had no choice but to go the route of this search warrant. So, yes, the former president does have to be really careful. Even a case that is questionable is still a case that can be brought. And so, yes, you have real culpability here if you're not careful. So, yeah, I mean, and who knows how far the DOJ will really take this.
Yeah, I can't wait. In a matter of hours, we will see something. Now, whether it shows us this is, as you suggest, maybe a disagreement over getting documents back, or something much more broad, a bigger criminal case to be presented potentially against the former president. We'll see if there's enough information in that redacted affidavit for us to know any more. But we thank you guys for lending us your expertise in the meantime. Francine, Joe, thanks.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, the estimated cost to America.